In 1946, Dr. Benjamin Spock published The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care. It sold 50 million copies and reshaped how America raised its children. But the generation Spock was writing to, those post-war mothers in cotton aprons and saddle shoes, were already raising well-behaved children without a single parenting manual on the nightstand. So, what did they know that we've forgotten? These are 13 of their daily habits, and every one of them has slipped away. Number 13. They taught children to stand when an adult entered the room. Walk into a living room in 1953 and watch what happened when a grown-up stepped through the front door. Every child in that room got to their feet. It did not matter if the visitor was a grandmother carrying a pie, a neighbor stopping by to return a Pyrex dish, or the insurance man making his weekly rounds down the block. The child stood, made eye contact, and waited until they were spoken to. None of that was optional. It was not a polite suggestion from a magazine article. That was the price of admission. The cost of being allowed to sit in the room with adults in the first place. And the standing was only the beginning. The child offered a handshake if the visitor extended one. If the guest was elderly, the child gave up their seat on the sofa without being asked. If the mother was serving coffee from the kitchen, a child old enough to carry a plate helped. The greeting was not a performance staged for company. It was daily practice of a principle that shaped how the child moved through every room for the rest of their life. The habit sounds quaint now, but the psychology behind it was anything but trivial. When kids rose to their feet for an adult, they were not performing a parlor trick for company. Without knowing it, the child practiced something their mothers understood on an instinctive level. Respect is physical before it becomes verbal. The body learns what the mind eventually follows. Anyone who trains their posture to respond to the presence of authority trains their instincts to follow the same pattern over time. Schools across the American South and Midwest reinforced the lesson daily. Teachers expected students to rise when the principal walked through the classroom door. Churches expected it on Sunday mornings when the pastor entered. The message landed from every direction, and it never varied. You are not the center of this room. You are welcome in it, but it does not revolve around you. That idea, absorbed through the legs, long before it reached the brain, shaped how an entire generation carried themselves through the world and into their adult lives. Number 12. Bedtime wasn't a negotiation. In the homes of the 1950s, bedtime arrived at the same hour every night like clockwork. 8 o'clock for the younger children, 8:30 for the older ones. There were no extensions for good behavior, no bargaining for one more chapter of a storybook, and absolutely no wandering back into the living room 10 minutes later with a glass of water and a brand new excuse. The child went to bed, and the house became the adult's domain again. The routine leading up to that hour was fixed too. A warm bath shared with a sibling to save hot water. Teeth brushed at the bathroom sink. Pajamas pulled from the dresser drawer. Then the child knelt beside the bed and recited, "Now I lay me down to sleep," while the mother stood in the doorway with the hall light behind her. Covers tucked in tight, a kiss on the forehead, and the door pulled shut. The ritual took 15 minutes and repeated without variation, 6 nights out of 7. But why did that rigidity matter so much? Call it what you want, but it wasn't cruelty. The right word is architecture. When bedtime held firm, everything downstream fell into place. The morning routine worked because the child had slept a full night. The school day worked because the child arrived rested. The mother's evening worked because she had had 2 quiet hours to mend a dress at the kitchen table, write a letter to her sister in Ohio, or sit on the porch with a cup of the coffee and listen to the crickets. What disappeared when bedtime became negotiable wasn't only the child's rest. What vanished was the mother's time to recover, and a mother who never recovers eventually frays at the edges in ways the whole family can feel. The women of that generation didn't talk about self-care. They didn't need a hashtag for it. They built recovery into the bones of the house by drawing one firm line at 8 o'clock each evening and refusing to let anyone cross it. That line protected the child's sleep. But it also protected the mother's steadiness. And a steady mother is the thing every home depends on. But bedtime was only one thread in a much tighter weave. What showed up at the table every evening might have carried even more weight. Number 11. Children ate what was put in front of them. The dinner table in a post-war American kitchen was not a restaurant. Nobody printed a children's menu on a placemat. Substitutions were not on offer. No requests for buttered noodles when the plate held pot roast and boiled carrots. The meal was prepared, the plates were filled, and every person at that table ate what they had been given, or they went without. Arguments did not happen at that table, and neither did negotiation. The plate sat there, patient and cooling, until the child made their choice. The roots of it were partly practical. Families in the Depression era and those who lived through the 1940s and 50s remembered wartime rationing, when sugar and butter came with government stamps. Wasting food in that world bordered on something close to sinful. Mothers who had grown up watching their own parents stretch a single chicken across 3 suppers were not about to let a 7-year-old push away a plate of green beans. But the lesson went deeper than groceries or budgets. When kids learned to eat what was served without complaint, they were absorbing something that had nothing to do with vegetables. The lesson underneath was that the world does not rearrange itself around your preferences. That discomfort is not a crisis requiring somebody's intervention. That you can sit across the table from something you do not love. Handle it with a closed mouth and good posture, and move on with your evening. Those are not small lessons for a 7-year-old. They are the lessons that keep a person steady 20 years later, when life puts something far worse than boiled carrots on the plate. Can a child understand that in the moment? Probably not, but the pattern settles into the muscles long before the words arrive to describe it. The habit at the dinner table set the stage for something even broader. Number 10. Every child had daily chores, and nobody got paid for them. A 4-year-old in 1955 could fold washcloths in the laundry room beside her mother. A 6-year-old could dry dinner dishes at the kitchen counter while standing on a wooden step stool. By 8, a child was sweeping the front porch every Saturday morning, feeding the family dog before breakfast, and hauling the heavy laundry basket down the hallway without being asked twice. By 10 or 11, they were babysitting younger siblings, peeling potatoes at the sink for supper, and pushing a mower across a lawn that stretched back to the fence. And nobody handed them a dollar bill for the effort. Nobody pinned an allowance to the work. No sticker chart on the Frigidaire door. No point system designed by a magazine advice columnist. The work was what you did because you lived under the roof. You ate the food at the table. You slept in the bed your parents provided. And you contributed to the household that made those things possible. That was the arrangement. And nobody sat you down with a contract to sign. What this created over time wasn't a generation of resentful child laborers grinding through their days. It created a generation that understood the weight of contribution. The lesson settled early. Belonging to a family meant shouldering part of its load, even when the task felt boring, even when the work was invisible to anyone outside the kitchen. When those children grew up and walked into their first shifts at automobile plants, offices, and department stores across the country, they didn't need a manager to explain what showing up meant. They'd already learned it standing at the kitchen sink at age 7, scrubbing the same cast iron pot their grandmother had scrubbed in the same kitchen 30 years before them. How does a habit like that carry so much weight across a lifetime? Because the habit was never about the dishes themselves or the lawn. The weight came from what the work stood for. But the household wasn't the only place where accountability lived. The sidewalk outside carried its own kind of authority. Number 9. The whole neighborhood raised the children. If a child misbehaved at Mrs. Patterson's house 3 doors down the sidewalk, Mrs. Patterson did not pick up the telephone and ask the mother's permission before saying something. She corrected the behavior herself, on the spot, in the same firm tone she used with her own 3 kids at her own kitchen table. And then she called the mother anyway, not to report a catastrophe, but to pass along the information the way you would pass along a casserole recipe after Sunday services at the Baptist church. Your Bobby was throwing rocks at the Hendersons' dog this afternoon. I told him to quit right then. Thought you would want to know. The mother did not consult an attorney or draft a post about personal boundaries on social media. She thanked Mrs. Patterson for keeping an eye out. And when Bobby walked through the front door that evening after playing outside, the conversation was already waiting for him at the kitchen table. That was the village, and it was not a metaphor on a coffee mug. A functioning network of adults on porches and at fences watched each other's children and held them accountable without ceremony. The child knew that the rules did not end at their own front yard. The rules followed them down the sidewalk, past the Hendersons' rose bushes, and into every backyard on the block. That knowledge, that invisible fence of adult attention stretching from one end of the street to the other, made formal discipline at home far less necessary. Why would you act up when every front porch had a pair of eyes and every kitchen had a telephone connected to your mother's ear? However, the neighborhood's role did not stop at correction. It also created the conditions for something else, something children today rarely experience. Number 8. Children played outside unsupervised, and they settled their own fights. The screen door swung open at 9 in the morning and didn't slam shut again until the streetlights flickered on at dusk. Between those hours, children ran through neighbors' backyards, climbed oak trees, built forts out of scrap lumber from construction sites, and organized kickball games in vacant lots, with rules they invented and enforced without any referee. If 2 kids got into an argument over whose turn came next on the tire swing by the creek, they worked it out, or they went home. Both outcomes taught them something valuable before supper. The games themselves had names that haven't crossed a child's lips in decades. Kick the Can, played with a dented soup tin from the garbage can in the alley. Red Rover, where 2 lines of children locked arms and dared a runner to break through at full speed. Hopscotch, scratched into the sidewalk with chalk. Stickball, played with a broomstick and a rubber ball in the middle of the street with fire hydrants serving as bases. The rules were passed down from older kids, adjusted on the spot, and enforced without any adult involvement at all. These games were self-governing. However, the mothers watching from the kitchen window weren't as absent as they appeared. Those mothers were standing at kitchen windows, keeping one eye on the backyard, while they canned peaches from the neighbor's orchard, or pressed a collar on a Sunday shirt with a hot iron. A mother could hear the difference between play screaming and trouble. She stepped in when it mattered, and she stayed back when it didn't. What unsupervised play taught children was negotiation, risk management, and emotional resilience, all absorbed naturally through scraped knees and hurt feelings, without anyone writing those terms on a chalkboard. A kid who falls out of a maple tree and climbs right back up has learned something about persistence that no classroom worksheet will ever replicate. The one who loses an argument with a friend on the sandlot baseball diamond and still shows up the next morning to play has learned something about forgiveness that no bedtime lecture could deliver. Does any of that sound familiar? It should, because the next habit on this list is the one that tied every day of the week together. Number 7. The family dinner table was sacred ground. In 1950, Encyclopedia Britannica Films released a short instructional movie called A Date with Your Family. The film showed a mother and daughter in a suburban home changing into fresh dresses before supper. It showed children laying out plates, silverware, and folded napkins on a linen tablecloth with a small centerpiece of cut flowers. The father walked in from work, and the family sat down, together. The narrator reminded viewers not to bring up unpleasant topics, not to monopolize the conversation, and not to mention gruesome events at the table. Dinner, the narrator declared in his polished mid-century baritone, was a time for pleasure, for charm, and for relaxation. The film feels like it was made on another planet. But the ritual it captured was common in homes from Connecticut to California. The evening meal was the fixed point around which the day rotated. Children set the table with coordinated plates and water glasses. Mothers stood over cast iron skillets and Pyrex baking dishes with apron strings tied behind their backs. Fathers sat at the head of the table. Conversations were polite, and manners were corrected in the moment they slipped. Anyone who chewed with their mouth open received a look from across the table that required no translation. The kid who interrupted was reminded once to wait their turn in the conversation. Complaining about the meatloaf was met with a silence that said more than any lecture. The Family Dinner Project, a modern research initiative connected to Harvard, has since confirmed what that generation of women already knew without needing a study to prove it. Children who eat regular family meals together perform better in school, report stronger relationships with their parents, and show lower rates of anxiety and behavioral problems. The data arrived decades later in academic journals. The wisdom arrived at 5:30 every evening when the plates came out of the cupboard and the family gathered at the table to eat together. But the table wasn't the only place where boundaries were taught and held. The way mothers handled questions told children something even deeper. Number 6. They didn't explain every decision to their children. Because I said so. 3 words that a generation of American mothers delivered without guilt or hesitation. When a child asked why they couldn't walk to Jimmy's house after school, the answer was no. When they asked why they had to wear their good leather shoes on a Wednesday, the answer was because I told you to. That was the end of the conversation. John Roseman, the family psychologist who spent over 50 years studying what he calls grandma's parenting, argues that this habit wasn't laziness or intellectual shortcutting. What they were practicing was leadership. A parent who explains every decision to a child is, in Roseman's framework, asking the child's approval before acting. And a parent who asks for that approval has already surrendered the authority the child needs them to hold. This doesn't mean those mothers ruled through fear or iron silence. It means they grasped something about the relationship between parent and child that's gotten tangled up in the decades since. A child doesn't need to agree with a decision in order to benefit from it. What a child needs is to trust that someone competent is steering the household, and that trust isn't built through lengthy explanations delivered at eye level on the living room carpet. It's built through consistency, through a mother whose word means the same thing on a rainy Tuesday afternoon as it does on a bright Sunday morning after church. When she said no and meant it, the child learned over time that her word was the floor beneath their feet, and solid footing is the one thing every child is searching for, even if they'd never describe it that way. But what replaced that footing when the next generation of parents took a different approach? Modern parenting has drifted in the opposite direction toward what Roseman calls the democracy error. Every decision gets a courtroom hearing at the kitchen counter. Every boundary gets a negotiation in the minivan. The result isn't a more informed child. It's a child who learns that every rule is up for debate, and that the right argument at the right moment can dissolve a boundary that was supposed to hold firm. But could that same willingness to hold the line show up in different parts of daily life? It could, and it showed up in all kinds of daily moments. Number 5. They taught children to fix things instead of throwing them away. When a bicycle chain snapped in the driveway in 1957, the child did not get a new bicycle from the Sears catalog. The child got a wrench, a rag, and a patient explanation from a mother or father who had repaired the same chain on their own Schwinn 20 years earlier, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and cut grass. When a cotton dress tore at the seam during recess, it was mended that evening at the singer's sewing machine in the spare bedroom. When the Philco radio on the kitchen counter went silent in the middle of a weeknight broadcast, the family pulled off the back panel and checked the vacuum tubes before anyone suggested buying a replacement at the hardware store on Main Street. Part of it came down to frugality. Families stretched their paychecks across mortgage payments, grocery tabs, and the collection plate at church on Sundays. And there was not much left for items that could be repaired at home. But it was also something deeper. Fixing things taught children that problems do not demand surrender, that patience produces results, that the first impulse to throw something away and start fresh is usually the lazy impulse, and the harder path of repair usually leads somewhere more satisfying. A kid who learns to mend a torn hem at their mother's sewing machine picks up something transferable. Something they will carry into their 30s and 40s without recognizing where it came from. They learn that broken does not mean the story is over. It means you have not found the fix yet. And when everything became disposable in the decades that followed, when toys got cheaper than the cardboard boxes they shipped in, and furniture was built to be replaced before the warranty expired, something shifted in how young people related to obstacles. If everything can be swapped out, nothing needs mending. And if nothing needs mending, the instinct that handles adversity never gets any exercise at all. Now, if you have been finding this valuable, go ahead and hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, the kind of history that shaped how American families live, love, and raise their children through the generations. And there is more coming right after this. But the mothers who fixed bicycle chains and mended torn dresses also understood something else about growth, something even quieter and harder to teach. Number 4, they let their children sit with boredom. You would not find a color-coded activity calendar pinned to the Frigidaire in 1954. No soccer practice at 4 o'clock, piano lessons at 5, and a tutoring session at 6:30. A child came home from school, hung their jacket on the hook by the back door, changed out of their school clothes, in the bedroom they shared with a sibling, and faced an afternoon stretching out to the horizon with nothing scheduled and nobody standing by to entertain them. The mother did not rush to fill that silence with an activity. She let it sit there like a guest who had arrived without an invitation. Go outside. Find something to do. That was the prescription, delivered over one shoulder while she wiped down the kitchen counter, and it came without further instruction or follow-up. The child, facing a long afternoon in the backyard with no television set to retreat into and no glowing screen to scroll through, did what human beings have always done when left alone with time and space. Some invented games in the dirt by the fence using sticks and pebbles. Others built contraptions from twine and cardboard boxes dragged out of the garage. A few lay on their backs in the grass behind the house and watched clouds roll over the oak trees. One sat on the concrete step by the kitchen door and talked to the family cat about nothing in particular. But what was really happening in all that silence? Boredom was not something those mothers treated as a crisis that needed solving before dinner. They understood, long before any university researcher published a paper confirming it, that a kid who is never bored never learns to generate their own forward motion. Every creative urge, every entrepreneurial spark, every flash of imagination that grows into something lasting over a lifetime begins in a pocket of emptiness that nobody rushed in to fill. When we packed childhood schedules wall to wall and handed over glowing tablets as pacifiers for stillness, we did not give children more opportunity for growth. We took something away from them, something they cannot name because they have never experienced the absence of it. Number 3. The marriage came first, not the children. In the 1950s, the most important relationship in the household was not the one between parent and child. The central bond was the one between husband and wife. The couple's bond was the foundation of the home, the concrete slab poured before any walls went up. The children were the rooms built on top of that foundation, and nobody in that generation confused the order of construction. This meant children learned to wait their turn. When parents were talking at the kitchen table over coffee after supper, the child did not barge in with a demand for attention or a request for dessert. When the parents went out for dinner on a Saturday evening at the steakhouse on Route 9, the child stayed home with a babysitter and understood, without being told explicitly, that the adults had a world that did not orbit around a child's schedule. The mother did not feel consumed by guilt when she walked out the door in a nice dress. She was investing time in the thing that made the household possible in the first place, the partnership at its center. Modern parenting has inverted this structure in ways that would have puzzled that generation. The child has drifted to the gravitational center of the household, and the marriage occupies whatever corner is left over after the soccer schedule and the homework crisis have been managed. But here is what that inversion tends to produce. Children raised at the center of the family do not become more grateful or more secure. They often become more anxious, because somewhere deep down, every child senses that they are not equipped to be the most important person in the room. They need to see that someone bigger and steadier is holding the structure together above them. When a child catches their parents sitting together on the porch after supper while the fireflies come out, that child sees stability in action. They see two adults who chose each other and who keep choosing each other across the years. That gives the child permission to stop performing and settle into the business of being young. But if the marriage held the house together, there was one specific behavior from the mother that kept the daily rules from crumbling. Number 2, they followed through on every consequence every time. When a mother in 1952 said, "If you do that one more time, you're spending the rest of the evening in your room," the child spent the rest of the evening in their room upstairs with the door closed. There was no renegotiation at the bedroom door 30 minutes later. No softening of the sentence halfway through the night because the family was watching a program on the television. No quiet decision to let it slide because company was arriving for coffee or because the mother was exhausted from hanging laundry on the clothesline all afternoon in the July heat. The consequence was announced. The boundary was crossed, and the response landed exactly as promised. This is the habit that made every other habit on this list hold together. Consistency was the engine underneath all of these rituals. A bedtime means nothing if it drifts by 30 minutes whenever a child protests. A mealtime rule means nothing if it vanishes on weekends. A chore means nothing if it becomes optional whenever the child pushes back hard enough. What that generation of women understood is that children do not learn from the harshness of a consequence. They learn from its reliability. A mild consequence delivered without fail carries more weight than a severe one delivered randomly. But knowing that is not the hard part. The hard part is what consistency actually cost the mother who practiced it. Following through required something from her that does not get discussed often enough in conversations about discipline. It required her to sit with her own discomfort and keep sitting. Sometimes it means abandoning a full grocery cart in the cereal aisle of the Piggly Wiggly while other shoppers stare. Sometimes it means enduring tears at a birthday party that could have been stopped with one small concession. Sometimes it means being the only mother on the street who did not cave. And those women sat through all of it because they knew something worth knowing. The line itself was the gift. Once a child knows exactly where the boundary sits, They do not need to spend their energy testing for it every single day. They can stop pushing and start living on the other side of it. So if consistency held all the other habits in place, what held the child in place? What gave them a reason to cooperate that went beyond avoiding punishment? Number 1. They taught their children that they belonged to something bigger than themselves. On a Sunday morning in 1955, a child put on their best clothes, climbed into the back seat of the family sedan, and sat in a wooden pew at the Baptist church on Main Street. While the choir sang hymns and the pastor delivered a sermon they mostly did not follow. Then the family drove home, gathered around the dining table for fried chicken, cornbread, and biscuits with butter, and spent the afternoon on the porch under the pecan trees while the radio played low through the screen door. The child did not choose this schedule and did not vote on it or have any say in the matter. It was the rhythm of the week, as fixed as the sun coming up over the roof lines on Monday morning. But the church pew was only one piece of a much larger pattern those mothers built around their children. Family stories circled the dinner table throughout the week. Stories about grandparents who had come over from Ireland or up from Alabama on a train, who had survived the Depression, who had built a house with their hands when they had nothing else. In the hallway, family photographs hung in wooden frames, sepia-toned portraits that watched you walk past on the way to the bathroom at night. Recipe boxes filled the kitchen drawer, packed with index cards stained with flour and Crisco in a grandmother's looping cursive. No one sat the child down for a lecture about heritage. The child absorbed it through the walls, through the taste of a biscuit recipe that was 3 generations old and still warm from the oven. This sense of belonging to a family, to a congregation, to a neighborhood where everyone knew your last name, did something that no reward chart or parenting app could ever accomplish. It gave the child an identity anchored in something outside of their own passing wants and moods. And kids who know they belong to something larger do not need to misbehave to find out where they stand. They already know. They are standing in a long line of people who expected something of them, and that expectation was not a weight pressing down on small shoulders. It was the closest thing to security a child could feel. So what happens when all 13 of those habits disappear within the span of a single generation? Those habits were never printed in any parenting manual. They passed from mother to daughter in kitchens and on front porches, in the rhythm of a set table at supper time, and the weight of a firm no delivered without apology. The era that produced them was not perfect. But those women understood something that slipped away in the decades that followed. A child does not need a parent who is constantly explaining, constantly entertaining, constantly renegotiating the terms of the household. A child needs a parent who is steady. A parent whose word means the same thing on a rainy Wednesday as it does on a clear Sunday morning after church. A parent who loves them enough to let them be uncomfortable, and who trusts them enough to let them figure things out on their own front step with nobody rushing in to help. If this story reminded you of someone who raised you that way, we covered another chapter of that history not long ago. It is worth your time.